know. I'm the author of Old Porn Comics. Old Porn Comics is a comic strip with 3 panels, and sometimes I add a haiku in one of the panels, so I call those haiku comics or haiku cartoons. And I started making those in 2007. The 2 characters in my comic strips are 2 frogs in the pond. So one of them is Master Kawazu, who's a haiku master, who's teaching haiku to a young apprentice, Kairu. So the way it started is basically just a haiku master giving haiku lessons to his young apprentice. So throughout the first years of my haiku comics, the frogs were talking about haiku, but they were not writing it. And then something happened in February 2011. There's an event called National Haiku Writing Month, Nahairimo in short, that you are probably familiar with. So during that event that was created by Michael Dillon Welch, he invited haiku poets to basically write 1 haiku a day for a month, and that took place in February. And I'm like, wow, you know, I really want to make comics this month because, you know, it's going great. I love making comics, but I also want to participate in National Haiku Writing Month. So how am I going to do both? And I decided at this point, well, you know what? I'm going to have my frog, Kairu, write a haiku, and I'm going to put it in the comic strip. So at this point in my storyline anyway, Master Kawazu was wondering if he would take my apprentice as an official apprentice. So he says, you know what? In order for you to become my apprentice, you're going to have to pass a test. You're going to write 1 haiku a day for a month. So at this point, so that was perfect, right? So basically, and also because in my comic strip, it was my frog, Karen, who was writing the haiku, so that kind of relieved my stress, because I thought, if the haiku is bad, I can always say, well, that was written by frog, you know? So for example, in one of my comic strips, you know, the haiku apprentice shows up with a karate outfit and says, I'm ready for my haiku lesson. And the master says, you know, Kariru, there's no white belt in haiku. And the apprentice goes, ah. And then the haiku comes up, this morning, once again wearing my frog outfit. So that's from the point of view of the frog, so that's a little bit different. And a year later, in February 2012, again comes Nahairimo, and I was trying to do my haiku comics, and at some point, but this time I was writing my own haiku, but at some point it's really hard to write a haiku about, you know, certain subjects, so I thought, I have no idea for that subject, you know. Michael gives us themes like nachos sometimes, but I thought I had a good idea of, you know, a poem by Basho or Isa about that theme. What about I just use their haiku, and I would put the haiku in my strip, and then I would just have to write a joke and illustrate it. So that was perfect. Once again, I always feel, because my first language is French, that, you know, my haiku a little bit weak in English, and that kind of relieved my stress, you know, having the frog write the haiku, and then using the haiku masters. And that's really how I started illustrating famous Japanese haiku masters, the official haiku comics. And it's a genre that, you know, that was not yet invented, I guess, that I'd never seen. So I had to invent the rules, and so I think what worked better for me is always to place the haiku somewhere in the panel, so the haiku would fit in one of the panels, and then I would have 2 panels to make a joke and have a story happening. But one of my favorite techniques is actually to have the haiku in the dialogue. I think it flows better, it's part of the story a little bit more, especially a haiku by Kobayashi Isa. That I love to illustrate. For example, there's Isa here throwing pieces of bread to a sparrow, and he says, "Come with each other, let's play, little sparrow without any mother." And the sparrow comes back and says, "I'm busy." And he's back eating the crumbs that Isa gave him. In terms of techniques, to me, it's, I love writing haiku by especially Kobayashi Isa, because if you're going to make a haiku comics, if you're going to illustrate a haiku, I mean, there's beautiful haiku about winds and sunshine, but how do you illustrate that? So I discovered I really like Kobayashi Isa's poem because he writes about small creatures. So there's a haiku about a sparrow, about a goose, about a cow, a horse. You can make these characters and you can do really funny things with those. And so Kobayashi Isa, I've been doing a lot of him. And I always thought in haiga. I haven't studied haiga, but one of the rules I remember, I don't know from where, but I thought the image should never repeat what the haiku is saying and vice versa. But I find in my comics sometimes I can get away with things because the dialogue and the jokes are adding one element. And one example is that there's this haiku by Kobayashi Isa, stretching his neck, the goose peeks in my gate. And in my comic, you can see the goose, then it raises his neck and says, "What you doing?" What's up? Originally it was "What's up?" And the thing with the comic strip, because it's so short, and I wanna just like in Haiga, white space is very important. I always have to super edit my dialogue. Sometimes I would start with a dialogue that's 8 or 10 words long and end up with 2 words like "what you're doing." At first it was a long dialogue, like "what are you up to? What are you doing?" So just "what's up" or "what's doing" is enough. And so that's it. Well, since my haiku are published online on my website, and they also appear monthly on a Japanese-Canadian journal of history and culture. So, and and the Haiku Foundation, as you know, is publishing the comic every Saturday. So really part, reading the funny stories in a newspaper Saturday was always part of my tradition. So, yeah. So,
Good.